The Rodriguez family thought they had finally found their dream home at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. Eric and Madeline fell in love with the charming old Dutch colonial the moment they saw the Zillow listing. The welcoming front porch, the spacious rooms, the beautiful stone fireplace. Even with a tight budget, they felt the house was meant to be theirs. Less than a week after touring it, they signed the papers and prepared to move their family of 500 miles from Ohio to start a new life in the New York suburbs. Eric had landed an exciting job opportunity, and they were eager for this next chapter. Their first night in the empty house, sleeping on the hardwood floors in their sleeping bags, seemed to confirm that 657 Boulevard would be a wonderful home for them. But the next morning, that illusion was shattered. Madeline discovered a strange, unmarked envelope wedged in the front door. Puzzled, she brought it inside and handed it to Eric. He carefully opened it to find a single sheet of paper with an ominous typed message. "Why are you here? I will find out." It was signed simply, "The Watcher." Eric and Madeline exchanged frightened looks, unsure what to make of it. Was it some kind of prank? Before they could ponder it further, their 7-year-old daughter Mia came running in waving a second envelope. "Look, Mom." A letter was in the back door too. With mounting dread, Eric opened it to find an even more disturbing message, revealing that the Watcher had been observing the house for decades and was obsessed with its second coming. As it approached its 100th birthday, the writer claimed to have the right of possession over the home and ominously asked if they knew its dark history and secrets hidden in the walls. Panicked, Eric and Madeline rushed to the police station, not wanting to frighten their children. But the Westfield Police Chief Ryan Monroe seemed skeptical, even angry, demanding to know if it was a hoax. Eric pounded the desk in frustration. This was supposed to be their dream home, and now it was turning into a nightmare. Unsure what else to do, the family retreated to a hotel for the night. But upon returning to 657 Boulevard the next day, they found a third message from the Watcher waiting for them. This one said the house was anxious for them to move in and referenced being able to observe them through the windows and doors. Now truly terrified, they went back to the police. This time, an officer retrieved a fourth letter while the house was under surveillance. Chief Monroe read it with alarm. It spoke of the writer's obsession with 657 Boulevard being his life and job, and disturbingly pondered if their children would be afraid to play alone in the basement where no one could hear them scream. Before police could even locate the Rodriguez to discuss this development, the petrified couple showed up with a fifth and final envelope, which they hadn't dared open themselves. Photographing it as evidence, Monroe was aghast to read the Watcher now making vague threats about car accidents, fires, mysterious illnesses, and loved ones suddenly dying to get the family to move out so young blood could once again reside at 657 Boulevard. Within minutes, the Rodriguez family was in their car speeding back to Ohio, never to return to their dream house that had become a living hell. The police and FBI launched an extensive investigation, but the Watcher seemed to vanish into thin air. Leads were scarce and the case went cold. As the terrifying ordeal made national news, the people of Westfield were deeply shaken that such a thing could happen in their quaint, quiet town. Parents hugged their children tighter and suspiciously eyed any unfamiliar faces on their streets. 657 Boulevard sat empty, a for sale sign perpetually in its yard as it became a macabre local legend, a cursed house that no one dared occupy. Hundreds of miles away in Ohio, the Rodriguez family tried to put the pieces of their shattered lives back together. But Eric and Madeline jumped at every strange sound, checked the locks obsessively, and barely slept, haunted by the idea that the Watcher might somehow find them again. The children had nightmares and Mia became sullen and withdrawn, her innocence crushed by the move that was supposed to be an exciting adventure, not a horror movie come to life. Over the next decade, the people of Westfield tried to move on, while always wondering uneasily about the identity of the Watcher. The police and mayor held press conferences to update the public on the anniversary of the disturbing letters, but there was little progress to report as the case remained unsolved. Whoever the letter writer was, they never struck again, which almost made it more unsettling, as if they had accomplished their goal of driving away the Rodriguez family and the young blood from their obsession at 657 Boulevard. Madeline and Eric went to therapy and tried to focus on making good memories with their children, determined not to let the trauma steal their future. But the Watcher was always in the back of their minds, a dark specter that dimmed even the happiest moments. Somewhere deep down, they knew they would never fully have closure until the mystery was solved. Then, on the 10th anniversary of the sinister letters, an FBI agent showed up on the Rodriguez doorstep in Ohio with shocking news. 657 Boulevard was far from the only victim. That very morning, the Watcher had resurfaced in multiple Midwestern towns, leaving similar threatening letters for new families in historic homes. The FBI and multiple local police departments were mobilizing to find the culprit as a fresh wave of terror rippled across the region. They wanted to interview the Rodriguez again as the first known survivors of the letter writer's campaign of psychological torture. With their worst fears realized that the Watcher was still out there, now expanding his targets, Madeline and Eric agreed to help in any way possible. Agents pored over their original letters looking for any missed clues. Madeline racked her brain trying to remember any suspicious characters from their brief time on Boulevard. Had they noticed anyone strange watching the house? Had anyone at Eric's new job seemed to take an odd interest in where they were living? As they relived their horrific experience and the media descended again, the family prayed it would somehow lead to answers this time. They knew all too well the dread and helplessness now gripping the latest victims hundreds of miles away. But as the investigation spread across multiple jurisdictions, a surprising pattern started to emerge, one that turned suspicion away from Westfield itself. Many of the new targets were young families who had recently relocated for job opportunities, just like the Rodriguez had. And strangely, several of the fathers worked for companies that had used the same corporate relocation and real estate firm to manage their employees' moves and house hunting. Frantically comparing notes with their counterparts at the impacted police departments, federal agents discovered the relocation company had a data breach in its client records predating the Westfield letters. It appeared a third party had accessed the employment and real estate information of relocated families, including the Rodriguez. The FBI began urgently tracking down and questioning anyone associated with the firm who would have had high-level access to the compromised data. With the heat now on, the Watcher seemed to vanish into the wind once again, with the letters abruptly stopping as word of the investigation circulated. Then, a twist no one saw coming, an arrest not of an employee of the relocation company, but of someone tied to one of the real estate agencies that most frequently worked with it to place relocated families in homes. 60-year-old Richard Dick Calhoun. On the surface, Calhoun seemed to be a completely benign character, a mildly successful if socially awkward realtor who had never even had a speeding ticket. He had no personal or professional connection to 657 Boulevard or Westfield. No one who knew him could believe he was accused of being the psychopathic stalker. But a deeper dive into his background revealed a troubled childhood in an abusive family that had bounced between multiple Midwestern states as his father repeatedly relocated for work. Young Richard had been viciously bullied in each new town and felt powerless. His only escape his bizarre fixation on the one beautiful historic home they had briefly lived in when he was 8 years old before having to abruptly move yet again for his dad's career. He became obsessed with the idea that the house was his safe haven, convincing himself that if his family had been able to stay there permanently, all of the trauma and disruption would have never happened. As his mind deteriorated over the decades, his resentment festered toward families who were taking over historic homes, paranoid they couldn't possibly appreciate them the way he felt he would. He had leveraged his real estate connections to access the relocation company's data on incoming transfers, allowing him to track the new owners of suitable homes and terrorize them into leaving so the houses could await their true resident. The Rodriguez had been his first targets after he accessed their information and became fixated on 657 Boulevard as the reincarnation of his childhood refuge. Evidence mounted as agents discovered Calhoun had traveled to the various impacted towns, including Westfield, on the dates of the letters. Handwriting analysis matched him to the envelopes. A search warrant of his computer found files with the text of all the letters. It appeared he was a lone wolf, a deranged man embittered by his stolen childhood and warped obsession with protecting old houses from unworthy occupants. Even as Calhoun was indicted on federal charges of stalking and interstate threats, the Rodriguez family struggled to process that the Watcher now had a face after all these years, not a menacing monster, but a pitiable man broken by his own demons. They felt none of the triumph they had expected when they used to daydream of their tormentor being unmasked. As they sat numbly in the courtroom at Calhoun's sentencing hearing, they politely nodded along as the judge expressed hope that the outcome would finally bring them some measure of peace and closure. But as they met eyes with their gaunt, listless tormentor across the room, they felt only a weary grief settling over them, far from the jubilant relief they had imagined. They knew they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, jumping at odd noises in the night. They would never feel quite safe in their own home again. The scars on their psyches, their marriage, their children, those would never fully heal. A disturbed man was going to prison, yes, but damage he wrought would always hover over them. While the rest of the world moved on from the sensational case, the Rodriguez family quietly picked up the pieces in therapy, determined to cling to the love and resilience that had gotten them through this far. They stayed in close touch with Calhoun's other victims, forging an unbreakable bond in their shared trauma. Years later, they cautiously dared to dream again of the beautiful life they had envisioned before the Watcher shattered it all. Only now, their idea of a perfect home wasn't one of sprawling square footage and picturesque details. It was four walls that sheltered a family who had survived the darkness together. It was a front door that opened to reveal loved ones who had never stopped fighting for each other. It was a future where they could somehow still dare to hope again, even after the Watcher